Welcome to our channel, Unveiling the Bible. We are about to embark on a journey not across continents, but through centuries. Today, we will gently brush away the dust of ages to uncover voices that resonate from the grand tapestry of the biblical narrative, voices that belong to women. Their names may be familiar, etched in the memory of Sunday school lessons and sermons, but do we truly understand their stories? Do we feel the pulse of their lives? They are not cold plaster saints in stained glass windows, nor are they distant, hazy symbols of piety. They were women of flesh and blood who, like us, knew the agonizing pangs of struggle, the bitterness of sorrow, and the frailty of the human spirit. Yet, in the crucible of their moments, propelled by a faith that defied circumstance, they unleashed a force that would ripple through history. They were not merely adjacent to the story of God. They were in many ways its very heart. The Bible, this library of ancient scrolls that carries the weight of divine revelation, communicates its most profound truths primarily through one powerful mode: narrative. Story? It is through the tangible sensory experiences of relatable characters that complex, abstract truths found their most fertile ground in the human soul. The eternal is made intimate in the temporal. And so today, we will journey through the life stories of 7 women disciples, not merely to recount their deeds, but to touch the very texture of that faith that transcends time and space. We will adopt the lens championed by the work of Bible Project to Lens, that encourages us to look beyond what these women did, and to delve into the literary artistry and theological symphony meticulously woven by the biblical authors. We will explore the patterns, the echoes, the deliberate contrasts, and the profound character arcs that reveal the very nature of God Himself. This is more than an intellectual exercise or a historical survey. It is an invitation to learn how to read your own life. Their stories are mirrors, reflecting our own struggles, our own quiet despairs, and our own flickering hopes. They show us what it looks like to wrestle with God, to trust in His silence, to act in His name, and to be utterly transformed by His presence. So prepare your heart. Let us step into their world. Let us walk beside them in the barley fields of Bethlehem, stand with them in the shadow of the cross, and listen, in the echo of their lives, for the unique and urgent call He has for us today. Before we can truly appreciate the cadence of their footsteps, we must first feel the ground upon which they walked. The world they inhabited was a landscape of stark contrasts, a world vastly different from our own, shaped by unwritten rules and ironclad traditions that defined the very essence of their existence. To understand their faith, we must first understand their world. 1. Disciple. More than a follower, a remaking of a life. First, we must reclaim the weight of the word disciple. In our modern lexicon, it has been diluted, often used as a synonym for student or a passive follower. But the Greek word in the New Testament, mathoktos, mikorshita, nikol, carries the force of a life-altering commitment. It doesn't describe someone who merely attends a lecture. It describes an apprentice who commits their entire being to a master. A mathot was not just learning what the teacher said. They were striving to live as the teacher lived. It was a holistic remaking of the self, an immersion into the master's way of being that would shape one's thoughts, habits, speech, and very soul. The goal was not just to acquire information, but to achieve transformation, to become like the Master. When Jesus of Nazareth issued His call to discipleship, it was radical even by these demanding standards. Other rabbis might call disciples to study the Torah, but Jesus called them to follow Him. He placed loyalty to His person and His mission at the absolute center. He demanded a reordering of all other loyalties, insisting that allegiance to God's kingdom must supersede even the most sacred of familial bonds and a primal instinct of self-preservation. This wasn't a call to heartlessness, but a revelation of the all-encompassing priority that this new identity demanded. It was a complete recalibration of one's life purpose. Furthermore, it's illuminating to note that mathatas is etymologically linked to the concepts of discipline and self-control. This tells us that the life of a disciple was not one of passive reception, but of active, intentional, and continuous self-management and spiritual exercise. It was a path of deliberate practice, of choosing again and again to align one's life with the teachings and character of the Master. This is the weighty calling we must understand before we can see what it meant for a woman of that era to answer it. 2. The woman's lot. A longing in the shadow of patriarchy. Now, let us try to imagine the world as seen through the eyes of a woman in biblical times. Whether in the ancient Near East of the Old Testament or the Greco-Roman world of the New, the pervasive structure was one of patriarchy. Society was organized around male leadership and authority. 一定要平稳，情感虔诚，带有适当的停顿和强调。A man's identity was his own. A woman's was almost always relational. She was someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. Her value in the eyes of society was inextricably tied to her fertility. The ability to bear children, particularly sons, was not just a personal joy but a social and economic necessity, ensuring the continuation of the family line and name. Consequently, barrenness was not a private medical misfortune. It was a public shame, a source of profound disgrace that could leave a woman marginalized and desperate. It was often interpreted as a sign of divine disfavor, leaving her to carry a heavy burden of both social and spiritual anxiety. The raw, aching story of Hannah, whom we shall soon meet, unfolds against this very backdrop of public humiliation and private grief. In the sphere of religious life, a woman's participation was also strictly circumscribed. The priesthood was an exclusively male domain. Moreover, normal biological cycles like menstruation and childbirth rendered a woman ritually unclean for periods of time, severely limiting her access to the sacred spaces of the tabernacle or temple. This was not necessarily a moral judgment, but a ritual distinction between the realms of life, death, and the unique holiness of God's presence. Nevertheless, the practical effect was a systemic reduction of her opportunity for direct participation in the community's central religious activities. In public life, social codes were rigid. It was often considered improper for a respectable man to engage in conversation with a woman in public, especially one he did not know. And the study of the sacred texts, the deep theological engagement with the Torah, was overwhelmingly considered a male privilege and duty. It is only when we grasp the height and thickness of these cultural walls that we can begin to appreciate the earth-shattering, countercultural significance of the actions of women like Ruth, Esther, and Priscilla, when they stepped out in faith, when they served their communities, when they taught, and when they led. They were not simply taking a step forward. They were pushing against the immense, crushing weight of an entire world's expectations. Every act of agency was an act of quiet, profound revolution. 3. The revolutionary dawned, the encounter between Jesus and women. Into this world, thick with limitations and unspoken rules, stepped Jesus of Nazareth. His arrival was not just a theological event. It was a sociological earthquake. His attitude towards women, so casual in its respect and so intentional in its inclusion, was nothing short of revolutionary, laying a firm and undeniable foundation for the discipleship of women. Consider his actions. He shattered multiple taboos at once by engaging the Samaritan woman at the well in a lengthy, public, and deeply theological conversation. He crossed 3 formidable barriers: gender, race, and religion. He didn't just speak to her, he engaged her mind and spirit, revealing his own identity to her in a way he had not yet done with his male disciples. He healed a woman who had been bent over for 18 years, a chronic condition that would have left her a permanent outcast. And in healing her, he didn't just restore her body, he restored her identity and dignity, calling her a daughter of Abraham. With this simple phrase, he affirmed her full and equal, standing within God's covenant people, a birthright that her gender and infirmity had long obscured. Most crucially, He welcomed women into his inner circle as disciples, teaching them the sacred truths of God's kingdom alongside the men. The scene in Luke's Gospel, where Mary of Bethany sits at Jesus' feet, is profoundly significant. This was the traditional posture of a rabbinic student, a position almost exclusively reserved for men. When her sister Martha complained, Jesus affirmed Mary's choice, declaring that she had chosen the one thing necessary, the good portion that would not be taken from her. In that moment, he wasn't just settling a domestic dispute. He was validating a woman's right to theological education and deep spiritual contemplation, placing it at the pinnacle of discipleship activities. Luke's Gospel also makes a point to record a stunning social phenomenon. A group of women, including Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons, not only followed him, but actively supported his entire ministry out of their own means. This was a radical and spectacular sight in the ancient world. It shows that Jesus didn't just passively allow female followers. He actively created a unique space for them to participate in and provide for his mission, treating them as essential partners in the work of the kingdom. Through these interactions and countless others, Jesus declared that the kingdom of God was open to all, irrespective of gender, status, or background. He modeled a new kind of community, a fictive kinship, bound not by blood or marriage, but by allegiance to him, where all members possessed equal value, dignity, and spiritual potential. It is with this understanding of the weight of discipleship, the constraints of their world, and the revolutionary freedom offered by Jesus, that we can now, finally, turn to the life of our first woman disciple. Our first stop is a time of chaos and moral ambiguity. We land in the era of the Judges, a dark and turbulent period in Israel history, hauntingly summarized by the recurring refrain, "In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." It was an age of spiritual apostasy, political instability, and tribal warfare. Yet, against this grim and gritty backdrop, a story of breathtaking beauty unfolds, a pastoral symphony of love, loyalty, and redemption, played out in the sun-drenched barley fields of Bethlehem. Its protagonist is not an Israelite warrior or a prophet, but a young Moabite widow named Ruth. 1. The overture. From fullness to emptiness, and a fateful choice, the story begins, as so many ancient tales do, with a famine. A cruel irony strikes Bethlehem, a name that literally means house of bread, for the bread has vanished. A man named Elimelech, driven by desperation, makes the fateful decision to leave his homeland of Judah. He takes his wife, Naomi, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and migrates to the neighboring and often hostile land of Moab. There, in a foreign land, among a people who worshipped foreign gods, they attempt to build a new life. The sons marry Moabite women, Orphan and Ruth. For a time, perhaps, there was a fragile stability, but destiny delivers a series of crushing blows. Over the course of a decade, tragedy strikes not once, not twice, but 3 times. Elimelech dies, then Mahlon dies, then Chilion dies. Pause and absorb the devastation of this moment. Picture Naomi's world in an ancient patriarchal society where a woman's security and identity were almost entirely dependent on her male relatives. She is left utterly bereft. She is a widow without a husband, a mother without sons, an Israelite stranded in a foreign land with nothing but 2 foreign daughters-in-law who are themselves now widows. Her life has gone from fullness to complete emptiness. Her very name, Naomi, which means pleasant or sweet, becomes a mockery of her reality. Later she will insist on being called Mara, which means bitter, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Word reaches her that the famine in Judah has ended, that the Lord has visited his people and given them bread again. With nothing left for her in Moab, she sets out on the long, dusty road back home. a journey of retreat and resignation. Along the way, in an act of profound, gut-wrenching realism, she turns to her two daughters-in-law. Her speech is not sentimental. It is a clear-eyed assessment of their hopeless situation. 带有适当的停顿和强调. Go, return each of you to her mother's house. I have nothing left to offer you. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I did, and even if I had sons, would you wait until they were grown? No, my daughters. She urges them to seek security back with their own people and their own gods. Orphan, with tears and a farewell kiss, makes the logical, understandable choice. She turns back. But Ruth does the unthinkable. She clings to Naomi. 2. The covenant vow, your God will be my God. What Ruth says next is one of the most magnificent declarations of loyalty in all of human literature. It is a vow that echoes down through millennia, a testament to a love that refuses to let go. Do not urge me to leave you, or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. Ruth 1:16-17. To call this merely an expression of affection between a daughter-in-law and mother-in-law is to miss its radical depth. This is a covenantal oath. This is a declaration of head. Hesed is one of the most important theological words in the Old Testament, and it is notoriously difficult to translate into a single English word. It encapsulates a powerful blend of covenant loyalty, steadfast love, unfailing kindness, faithfulness, and mercy. It's not a feeling, it's an action. It's a love that is demonstrated through unwavering, self-sacrificial commitment, regardless of the cost or benefit to oneself. Ultimately, Hesed is the word used to describe God's own relentless, tenacious, never-giving-up love for his covenant people, Israel. And here, in the mouth of a Moabite widow, we see a perfect human reflection of that divine attribute. The absolute heart of her vow, the pivot upon which her entire future turns, is this: your God will be my God. This is a profound leap of faith. She is consciously choosing to abandon Chemosh, the God of her own people, and to cast her lot with Yahweh, the unseen God of Israel, a God she has likely only glimpsed through the life and memory of her bereaved mother-in-law. This is the true beginning of her journey as a disciple. It is a conversion of allegiance from one nation to another, from one deity to another, from a future of possibility to a future of utter uncertainty, bound only by love. 3. Grace in the barley fields. The hidden providence of God upon their arrival in Bethlehem. The harsh reality of their poverty sets in. To survive, Ruth, the courageous immigrant, ventures out to glean in the barley fields. It's a provision made in the Torah for the poor and the foreigner to gather the leftover grain after the reapers have passed through. And here, the biblical author uses a masterful, deceptively simple phrase, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. In the world of the Bible, there are no coincidences. This happened, this seemingly random chance, is the author's subtle way of winking at the reader, pointing to the unseen hand of God, orchestrating events from behind the curtain. For Boaz is not just any landowner. He is a wealthy and devout man of noble character, and, as we soon learn, he happens to be a near kinsman of Naomi's deceased husband, Elimelech. Boaz immediately notices this diligent foreign woman working in his field. He has already heard the reports of her remarkable hesed, how she left her father and mother and her native land to come to a people she did not know. He approaches her not with suspicion, but with profound kindness and protection. He blesses her with a prayer that is itself a statement of divine providence. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Boaz's generosity is the human channel for God's grace. He doesn't just permit her to glean. He commands his young men not to harass her, to let her drink from their water jars, and even to intentionally pull out stalks of barley from their bundles and leave them for her to gather. The wings of God she has taken refuge under are now made tangible in the protective care of this righteous man. 4. The disciples' journey and today's reflection. The story culminates in an act of redemptive love. Following Naomi's wise and daring plan, Ruth appeals to Boaz to act as her Goel, her kinsman, redeemer. This was a vital legal and social role, a responsibility of a near relative, 情感虔诚，带有适当的停顿和强调。Boaz, recognizing her virtue and moved by her loyalty, joyfully accepts this responsibility. He redeems Naomi's land and marries Ruth, restoring the broken family line. The child born to them is named Obed. He would become the father of Jesse, who would become the father of David, Israel's greatest king. And so, this Moabite widow, this outsider, is woven directly into the messianic line. Her name is one of only a handful of women listed in the formal genealogy of Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Matthew. The story of Ruth poses a series of profound questions to us today. Ruth, the foreign widow, teaches us, with her quiet, steadfast life, that loyal love can overcome any barrier. She demonstrates that when we take a step of faith, trusting ourselves to the wings of a God we may barely know, He will meet us in unexpected ways, turning our bitterness into sweetness, and our emptiness into a glorious, world-changing fullness. Now, let us turn our gaze to another woman living in the twilight of the Judges period. If Ruth's story is a gentle pastoral poem, Hannah's is a dramatic symphony that moves from a solo of intensely personal anguish to a soaring prophetic chorus of praise. Her story is a master class in how God often uses the crucible of private pain. 得有适当的停顿和强调. 1. The Overture. The tears of Shiloh. Hannah lived in a time 带有适当的停顿和强调. The religious heart of the nation was at Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant resided in the tabernacle. But the priesthood itself was corrupt. The two sons of the high priest, Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas, were worthless men who despised the Lord's offerings and abused their power. This was the spiritual atmosphere. Formal religion masking a decaying core. Against this bleak national backdrop, Hannah was enduring her own private, unspeakable agony. She was one of two wives of a man named Elkanah. The text tells us simply that her husband loved her, but that the Lord had closed her womb. We must remember the crushing weight of this statement in our culture. Barrenness was the ultimate female shame, a constant, public reminder of one's perceived failure and incompleteness. To make matters infinitely worse, her husband's other wife, Peninnah, had children, and Peninnah was cruel. The text says she would provoke her grievously to irritate her. 1 Samuel 1-6. This wasn't a one-time insult. It was a relentless campaign of psychological torture. Every year, the family would make the pilgrimage to Shiloh to worship. This should have been a time of festive joy. But for Hannah, it was an annual ritual of renewed humiliation. While Peninnah proudly distributed portions of the sacrificial meal to her many sons and daughters, Hannah received only a double portion from her loving, but perhaps clueless husband, a gesture of love that only highlighted her lack. The taunts of her rival would escalate, and Hannah would be reduced to a state of such bitterness of soul that she would weep and refuse to eat. Have you ever had a Peninnah in your life? A person, a circumstance, a persistent inner voice that constantly reminds you of what you lack, of your deepest pain, of your unanswered prayers. Have you ever, like Hannah, wept in a place of worship, feeling utterly alone in your sorrow? 2. A prayer of poured-out soul. When the spirit is laid bare before God in the depths of her despair, after another year of this torment, Hannah did something that would change the course of her life. And indeed, the course of Israel's history. She rose from the family meal and went to the temple of the Lord. There she prayed, but this was no ordinary prayer. The Hebrew text says she poured out her soul by 有适当的停顿和强调. She was no longer weeping silently. She was articulating her anguish, her desperation, 带有适当的停顿和强调, holding nothing back. She made a vow, a solemn oath. If God would only look upon her affliction and give her a son, she would dedicate that child back to God for his entire life, as a Nazarite, set apart for divine service. Her prayer was so intense, so all-consuming, that though her lips moved, no sound came out. The old, weary high priest Eli, sitting on his chair by the doorpost, observed her. Seeing her silent, passionate movements, he jumped to the most cynical conclusion possible. He assumed she was drunk. His accusation, "How long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you," must have felt like a final, crushing blow. Yet, in this moment, Hannah's response is one of profound dignity and clarity. "No, my lord," she replied. "I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord." 1 Samuel 1:15. This is the essence of authentic discipleship. A raw, honest encounter with the living God. She did not hide her pain behind pious platitudes. She did not perform for the priest. She simply presented her broken, sincere, and desperate heart to her Creator. 3. From dirge to anthem. God's great reversal. Eli, perhaps shamed by his misjudgment and moved by her transparent sincerity, changed his tone. He blessed her. "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." 1 Samuel 1:17. And a miracle occurred. Not the miracle of conception. Not yet. The miracle was in Hannah's heart. The text tells us that after receiving this blessing, she went her way, ate, and her face was no longer sad. She had not yet received the promise, but by faith she had received the promiser. Her hope was now anchored not in the fulfillment of her desire, but in the character of the God who had heard her cry. God was faithful to his word and her prayer. In due time she conceived and bore a son, naming him Samuel, which means heard by God. For she said, "I have asked for him from the Lord." And Hannah, in turn, was faithful to her vow. After the boy was weaned, in that era, could mean at age 3 or 4, she did the unimaginable. She took her long-awaited, precious, miracle child back to Shiloh and presented him to Eli, formally dedicating him to a lifetime of service to the Lord. Can we fathom the faith and surrender this required? To give back the very thing your heart has yearned for, the very answer to your deepest prayer? Yet it is precisely in this moment of sacrificial offering that Hannah's personal story explodes into a universal anthem. Her mouth opens and outpours a magnificent hymn of praise known as the Song of Hannah, 1 Samuel 2:1-10. This song is no longer just about her personal gratitude for a child. It is a sweeping, theologically rich epic that celebrates the character and power of a God who turns the world's values upside down. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap. Her song culminates in a stunningly prescient prophecy. In an era before Israel even had a king, she prophesies about one. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. 1 Samuel 2:10. The word for anointed here is Mashiach, or Messiah. Her personal victory has given her a prophetic glimpse into God's ultimate plan of redemption, not just for herself, but for all of Israel, through a future anointed king. 4. The disciples' journey and today's reflection. Hannah's life reveals a profound spiritual principle. God often incubates his greatest public blessings in the womb of our deepest private pain. Her journey began with a desperate personal prayer for a son, but it ended with a majestic public proclamation of God's sovereignty and justice for an entire nation. The son she bore would become the great prophet, Judge Samuel. the one who would anoint Israel's first two kings and usher in a new era. Hannah, with her tears, her prayer, and her praise, shows us how the impossible situations in our lives can become the very platforms upon which God's power is most brilliantly displayed. Her story is an enduring call to persevere in prayer, even when the heavens seem silent, and to trust in the God who makes the barren sing and turns our deepest bitterness into overflowing joy. Our journey now takes a dramatic turn, leaving the rustic hills of Israel, 情感虔诚, 带有适当的停顿和强调 heart of the mightiest empire of its day. Persia. We arrive in the citadel of Susa, a world of dazzling wealth, labyrinthine court politics, and deadly intrigue. It is here that we meet a young Jewish orphan whose life will become a high-stakes drama of hidden identity, genocidal plots, and breathtaking courage. Her name is Esther. 1. The Overture, From Orphan to Queen. The story of Esther is set against the backdrop of the Jewish exile. Generations after the destruction of Jerusalem, the Jewish people are scattered across the vast provinces of the Persian Empire, a vulnerable minority living under foreign rule. Esther, whose Hebrew name was Hadassah, was an orphan. Her parents were dead, and she was raised by her older cousin Mordecai, a devoted man who served as a minor official in the king's court. Her life began in obscurity and dependence, a forgotten child of a displaced people. The curtain rises on a scene of almost unimaginable extravagance. The Persian king, Ahasuerus, widely identified by historians as Xerxes I, throwing a spectacular 180-day feast to display the greatness of his kingdom and the splendor and pomp of his majesty. The story is set in motion by an act of drunken, patriarchal pride. When the king, in his cups, commands his wife, Queen Vashti, to parade her beauty before his male courtiers, she refuses. In a fit of rage, fueled by his bruised ego, Xerxes deposes her. A search is then launched for a new queen. A royal decree commands that beautiful young virgins from every province of the empire be brought to the palace harem. Esther is among them. Possessing exceptional beauty and a gentle spirit, she wins the favor of all who see her and is ultimately chosen by the king to be his new queen. She is crowned, robed in splendor, and given a place of supreme honor in the empire. Throughout this entire process, following the careful instruction of her cousin Mordecai, she keeps one crucial secret: she is a Jew. To go from an unknown orphan to the queen of a global superpower seems like the stuff of fairy tales. But the providence of God often places people in positions of astonishing privilege, not for their own comfort, but for a specific, harrowing purpose. The throne was not a prize. It was a platform for a test that would determine the fate of her entire people. 2. The national crisis. For such a time as this, the crisis arrives in the form of a man named Haman the Agagite, who is promoted to the position of Grand Vizier, second in command to the king. Haman is a man consumed by pride and malice. When Mordecai, out of loyalty to his God, refuses to bow down and pay homage to him, Haman is filled with a murderous rage. But his fury is not content with a personal vendetta. It metastasizes into a genocidal plot to annihilate every Jew, man, woman, and child, throughout the Persian Empire. He goes to King Xerxes, spinning a tale of a certain people, scattered throughout the kingdom, whose laws are different and who are a threat to the king's authority. With deceit and the promise of a massive bribe, he convinces the pliable and foolish king to issue an irrevocable decree. The lots, Purim, are cast, and a date is set. The 13th day of the month of Adar is to be a day of slaughter, a state-sanctioned genocide. When the decree is published, a wave of terror and grief washes over the Jewish communities. Mordecai tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth and ashes, and wails loudly at the king's gate. He knows there is only one person, one sliver of hope that can possibly save them: his cousin, the girl he raised, who now lives behind the impenetrable walls of the palace. He gets word to Esther, informing her of the plot and urging her to go before the king and plead for her people. Esther's initial response is one of fear. she sends a message back, reminding Mordecai of the inflexible law of the court. Anyone who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned is to be put to death. There is only one exception. If the king extends his golden scepter, that person may live. And I, she adds, have not been called to come in to the king for 30 days. Mordecai's reply is one of the most powerful and challenging speeches in the entire Bible. It is a thunderclap of theological truth and moral urgency that shatters Esther's fear and hesitation. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther 4:13-14. These words are an earthquake. They force Esther to see her position not as a shield of personal privilege, but as a mantle of profound responsibility. She understands that silence is not a neutral act. It is a choice with fatal consequences, both for her people and for her own soul. In this moment, the compliant young girl must grow into a decisive leader, willing to risk everything to fulfill her historic destiny. 3. If I perish, I perish. A leap of faith and a masterstroke of wisdom. After a moment of intense internal struggle, Esther makes the decision that will define her life and save her people. She sends a new message to Mordecai, one of resolve and courage. She instructs him to gather all the Jews in Susa and to fast for her for 3 days and 3 nights. I and my young women will also fast as you do, she says. And then she utters her famous declaration of faith, a statement of utter surrender to a sovereign if hidden God. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. This is the cry of someone who has placed her life entirely in God's hands. Yet her faith is not a blind, reckless fanaticism. After her leap of faith, she demonstrates extraordinary wisdom, patience, and strategic brilliance. When she enters the king's court and he extends the golden scepter, she doesn't immediately blurt out her accusation against Haman. Instead, she masterfully invites the king and Haman to a private banquet, and at that banquet she again demurs, inviting them to a second banquet the following day. This calculated delay is a stroke of genius. It piques the king's curiosity, inflates Haman's arrogant ego to its breaking point, and most importantly, it allows time for God's unseen providence to work. 4. The disciples' journey and today's reflection. The rest of the story is a breathtaking series of ironic reversals. At the second banquet, Esther reveals her Jewish identity and exposes Haman's treacherous plot. The enraged king has Haman executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. The original decree cannot be revoked, but a new one is issued, allowing the Jews to defend themselves against their enemies. The day of intended slaughter becomes a day of miraculous victory, a celebration commemorated to this day as the festival of Purim. The book of Esther is unique in that it never once mentions the name of God. There are no miracles, no prophetic pronouncements, no angelic visitations. And yet, God's sovereign hand, His hidden providence, is visible in every chapter, weaving events together through a series of coincidences. For instance, on the very night between Esther's 2 banquets, King Xerxes happens to have a bout of insomnia. He happens to call for the court chronicles to be read to him. The reader happens to open to the passage detailing how Mordecai had previously uncovered an assassination plot, saving the king's life. And the king happens to discover that Mordecai was never rewarded for this act of loyalty. These are the fingerprints of a God who is always at work, even when he seems most silent. Esther's life poses piercing questions to each of us. Esther, the queen who found her voice in the heart of power, is a timeless testament to how one seemingly ordinary individual, filled with faith and courage, can be used by a silent, sovereign God to become an instrument of history, altering deliverance. Here we conclude the first part of our journey, having walked alongside 3 extraordinary women of the Old Covenant. In our time together, we have witnessed the radical covenant loyalty Hesed of Ruth, a foreign widow who clung to faith in an era of chaos and found her place in the messianic line. We have stood with Hannah in the temple courts, whose bitter tears and honest prayer for a son transformed into a prophetic song that would echo through the ages, celebrating the God who reverses the world's orders. Finally, we held our breath with Esther, the orphan queen, who, guided by God's unseen hand, risked her own life to become a voice for her voiceless people in the heart of a hostile empire. Each of them wrestled with a world defined by promise and shadow, acting with profound courage while waiting for a redemption that was still on the horizon. Now, the narrative of salvation history pivots. The air grows still with anticipation as we cross the threshold from the world of promise into the world of fulfillment. The central focus shifts from waiting for a promised king to encountering him face to face. The stories that await us in the next part are those of the women who did not just believe in a future Messiah, but who touched his hand, heard his voice, and followed in his physical footsteps, beginning with the young woman chosen to bring this new reality into the world.